remember me? Do you even know my mother's name?
Hey everybody, so sometimes you go to a movie and you go for like some random reason, like you really like the actor, the trailer got you, something like that, and then by the end of it, you're just blown away thinking like this is so much better than I was ever expecting. And that's what Monkey Man was, I think, for both of us.
Absolutely.
When we went to go see it. So the movie just like started showing in theaters today. Went and saw it. We're here to talk reactions. I'm a big fan of Dev Patel, and this is his first, this is his directorial debut, I think, right?
Yeah.
And definitely a change for him into the more action genre.
Absolutely. He does a lot of very dramatic dialogue and character-focused roles, which there was some of that in this too. But this is, I feel like, his action debut of being like a hero character in a movie, which I loved for him.
And it delivers because he needs to do more of this.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan. That is Hayden, by the way. I'm Tyler. Welcome.
How's it going?
Yep. We're here to talk this amazing movie. And spoiler alert, go freaking see it. Like, it's
for real.
I mean, we'll give you a score at the end, but this thing is phenomenal. Hey, we've done now with our team 3 of these, including this one, for the movies this year. And 2 of them I'm already pretty set on. Like, I'm not sure how you're going to be able to talk these off of our list of finalists at the end of the year when we do our awards. And it's this one and Dune 2.
For sure.
So we can't get so many good movies throughout the year, can we? Like, I hope so.
I don't know. I feel like this first part of the year has crazy bias, especially for our interest, because next week we're getting Civil War, which I feel like is also going to very much be both of our jams.
Yep.
So April's a good month for movies this year, and it usually isn't. So we kind of lucked out in this early springtime for sure.
We are off to a good start. I will say, going in, Monkey Man is extremely violent. There are dark themes in this movie. This is not a like rom-com date movie type of thing, right?
No,
so
it is way heavier than I thought it would be.
Yep.
There was an 8-year-old in my showing though, and she walked out like a champ. So no tears. Okay. So there are kids, anecdotally, who've gotten through this movie. At least one.
All right. None in my showing, but that's all right. But hey, our very scientific study has proven it's kid friendly.
Yeah, I don't know about that one, Chief.
Yeah. So yeah, it's very violent, a lot of dark themes, a lot of serious themes. I left Hayden a little bit thinking like, this is if John Wick had a really serious story and a lot of lore behind it.
Yes, I would agree with that take. I think there's a lot of John Wick influence here. And I
even mentioned John Wick in the movie.
They mentioned the movie John Wick, and I think, which is a really, really fun kind of callback and homage, because I think we talked about The Matrix on our podcast, which if you haven't seen that episode yet, go check it out. We reviewed all those for the 25th anniversary. But The Matrix is one of those movies that I think redefined its genre, and you live in a post-Matrix world when you make an action movie, right? I think the next benchmark for action was John Wick. And I think you can very much see the influence of John Wick in this movie. But I think it's done tastefully, and it's done to homage, and it's acknowledged, right? Where there's a really funny line I loved, is kind of like someone who's interested in like movie firearms and stuff, where they talk about, he's like, hey, I got the pistol for sale. It's the same pistol John Wick used in the movie, except it's a Chinese knockoff or whatever he says. But it is that, 2011 demon pistol. And he doesn't go for that. He goes for the much more subtle, just tiny little revolver. Which that choice immediately told me like, okay, we're not going for flash here, which I appreciated for sure.
This is a movie, and so one of my pet peeves in movies is when you start telling a story of like the everyman rises up to, take on power, but then by the end the everyman has superpowers, somehow along the way. That didn't happen here.
No, and I loved that.
Everything here was earned.
For sure. Yeah. And they gave us a nice timeline of how long his journey takes too. We know that he was in that temple training for 35 days or whatever. We get the news countdown talking about the Wally's coming up, and that's where the big finale takes place. So
such a smart way to tell us that, by the way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It really
I
was.
loved getting throughout the movie. Like, I usually hate like seeing like newscasts in movies. They a lot of times just kind of feel like a useless exposition dump, but I think they all kind of worked here because they informed you about the world that was happening and why, and the political not almost, just the political context of
There's
these
a lot
people.
of political context in this movie too, by the
Absolutely.
way. So,
yeah.
Yep.
Because it's a revenge story, but bro has beef with like the man who might be about to be elected president. So
yeah, and very much will be. I mean, based on the corruption that we've seen right throughout. So this tells a story of Kid is the character's name, although he names himself something else based on bleach, right?
Yeah, he calls himself Bobby, which is the brand of bleach he uses to clean. Yeah.
So
and do other things with.
Yep. So Kid had a very traumatic childhood, very close with his mother, and we talk about how he learned like this story of the Hanuman, right, which is like a Hindu god and legend there for those people, and so he learned that became a hero for him really as a child. And then we learn throughout the film like why he has this hatred towards these people that he's fighting back against now. We get more and more and more of it as we go. But I think so I'm going to give you the first controversial take, Hayden, and tell me what you think here.
Go for it. Okay.
This is very much inspired by John Wick. I like it better than John Wick.
I do too. At least, I mean, if we're comparing, because you can't compare one movie to a whole franchise, right? But I think if we're going to compare this movie to just the first John Wick, I agree with you there. Because I think you get a lot of the action set pieces and a lot of the crazy, 15 people on screen fights. But I think there's a lot more emotional weight and impact to it. And I think just inherently it's more visceral because John Wick was a very gunfight focused movie. And this is all like, this dude is a boxer, essentially, right? Or a kickboxer, an MMA fighter almost. So everything he's doing is very martial arts. It's very visceral. It's, picking up pots and pans and using the environment, which I thought was a great callback when that kind of comes around at the end for sure. But
it's a lot of like desperate fighting, because he's not even a well-trained fighter at first. Like that happens over the course of the movie in a way that makes a lot of sense, I think.
For sure. Because he's fighting in the beginning almost as a punishment to himself, right? Like he's doing, like he's taking those punches to punish him for the things he has guilt about in his life. And, he's kind of making some money off of it, doing some shady, essentially like rigging sports betting by guaranteeing that, he'll make it through the first 2 rounds, but lose the third, stuff like that.
It's a really impactful line late in the movie, like right around end of the second act, maybe, where it's like, to some extent, it's like you've lived your whole life trying to feel pain, and now it's time to remember who you are, and and basically inflict pain, go destroy in order to rebuild, and he gets the calling to fight for those who can't fight for themselves.
Yes.
And he becomes the mantra of this, the monkey man, essentially. And it's such a powerful story, and it's so good. And I think what makes it powerful, too, is that it's so personal. And you're cheering for these characters. You're invested in all of them. For sure. Damn, this movie's good. I don't know what else to say. Like,
well, we should get into characters a bit, because I was kind of surprised of how good and deep of the cast characters were in this movie. Because I think a lot of times when you get an action movie, it kind of feels like the people that are around are very shallow, right? Like if you compare something into John Wick, like the characters in John Wick exist either to be killed by him or to die to motivate him, essentially, right? And
you know what the second most, like the character I cared about the second most in John Wick was?
Who?
The dog.
Yeah.
But I'm a dog person, so that's a little
fair enough.
But dog in this movie is amazing, by the way.
Adorable, yeah. And it's funny because I actually made note of this, because when I was in film school, we learned one of the big screenwriting techniques you use to develop sympathy for your character is literally called petting the dog. And that's
showing
what happens in this.
Animals,
right. toward animals or children. Yeah. So,
Mhm.
and it's funny because I almost feel like that was a little subtle, tongue in cheek. I'm sure, he's someone who knows the film industry very much. He knows about that and how it's become kind of an inside joke among screenwriters. But I think it also is such a good character moment because he's feeding the dog garbage out of the dumpster, the restaurant he works at. But he works at a restaurant that's a fine dining establishment that's a front for like a human trafficking ring. So,
For all the like underground corrupt stuff happening.
For
in
everything,
Mumbai.
for drugs, for sex tourism, for all of it. So,
Mhm.
and there's the line where like, one of the women who works there sees him do that, and he's like, what you're feeding her is 4,000 rupees a plate.
Right?
And he just looks at her and then looks back at the dog. Like he doesn't even acknowledge it because that doesn't mean anything to him. Money is not an issue, not a motivator in his life.
Yep. And I love he's not just like caring for the dog, but he's also in a way training the dog, right? When she says to him, so we won't spoil this, but when she says to him, like, stop feeding the dog, it's just going to keep coming back. It clicked. You could see it click in his face at that moment, but it didn't. I didn't fully get it. I didn't fully get why at the time, but then later you see why, right?
Yeah. I think I'm definitely excited to rewatch this movie, and I honestly, I think I got to do it in theaters because there's people in my life I need to take to see this movie. I got to evangelize the word of Monkey Man, but because he has a very deliberately set up plan of how he's going to enact everything, but you don't really know what that is until the very end when it clicks. So I think it'll be really exciting to see his actions in the first act of the movie, knowing his motivations from the third.
He's also early in the film, like motivated by just anger and revenge, right? Yes. He has this plan, you're right, but he's not ready for it.
No, and the moment when it happens,
fight and kind of gets his ass kicked, For
sure. Yeah. And that's what I love about that is that it does feel, boss fight's a good term because it does kind of feel like a video game structure where it's like he goes to the high level area, he gets his shit rocked, he goes back to base, grinds for a while, levels up, comes back and rips through the fucking place. And it's like, I love the playing off of like action movie tropes. My favorite one was this scene's in the trailers, so I'll, we're cool with putting this in the spoiler free section, but he's going to make a big escape. He goes to sprint up to a window and like do the thing where he tucks in and you think he's going to jump through it and shatters it. And he just bounces right off it and leaves a blood stain on there from like where he bumped his shoulder. And I loved the roughness of that whole sequence, the first big fight sequence, because I usually don't like shaky cam in movies. I think a lot of times it's lazy. But here it makes sense cinematically because he's unstable, right? And as he gets more stable in the film, like the action scenes, once he learns how to really fight, are much more smoothly choreographed and much more smoothly shot that you can see really what's going on. And it's such a smart filmmaking decision that puts you really close to the action. And I almost wonder if, and I'm sure that some of that came from inspiration from working on Slumdog Millionaire, because that is a very closely shot, very frenetic. The word I kept thinking, honestly, with this movie is intoxicating at times, right? Where it's just so disorienting to be in. And I think that movie had that a lot as well. That's what he was pulling from.
When he's more, like, for lack of a better term, more amateurish in his abilities, right? Everything it's more shaky. It's choppy, cinematically, things like that. And then, like, when you get to Act 3, and now he's like Neo from the Matrix, essentially. He's just an ass kicker.
And they even dress him in the John Wick suit, too. Did you catch that? The all-black suit with no tie.
I was going to ask, like, when you're going to go and, like, get in a fight for your life against, like, a bunch of armed-trained professionals, why is everybody wearing dress shoes? Like,
I don't know. I would be wearing sneakers for sure, just to give you that extra added level of mobility. I think it was to help him kind of get into the environment more, to look like he fit in, but yeah.
But yeah, but at the end, everything's shot very smoothly. It's much more professionally, quote unquote, shot. I mean, the whole thing is professionally shot. It's brilliant.
But it's cleaner for yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So let's break and do spoilers now. How about that? Because I feel like we're not going to be able to chat without it for much longer.
Fair enough.
Okay. So essentially what happens in this movie is, like we learn the fate, kid's mother is killed when he's a child. and killed by these characters that are in power now in Mumbai at this point in his life, which is probably about 15 years later, I think, for story purposes.
Yeah, maybe 20, somewhere maybe around 20, that range for sure.
Somewhere in there. But he's held this rage and this anger that whole time. One thing I thought was kind of interesting. Go ahead.
Learning. He's been learning he's been internalizing and hasn't acted on it yet because he hasn't physically had the ability to act on that. And I think even when he starts, the first time we see him attack that particular character, that like the authoritarian police chief, he's not ready for that fight, and he very quickly realizes that and tries to make an exit. It's
very much Luke Vader in like Empire Strikes Back. You know, it's like you are not ready for this.
Nope.
So it's like when you're playing an MMO and you go into the level 35 area by accident, you know, and you're still like a level 8 and it doesn't end well. So yeah, that's kind of what it was like. But that fight represented that. It was a very desperate fight, and it was like grab anything you can use, just fight for your life type of thing, right? So I liked all of that. These characters, these bad guys, are responsible for the death of his mother. One of the things I really liked was like his hands. His hands are severely scarred.
Yes.
And it reminded me a little bit of The Dark Knight, how the Joker kept changing the story of how it happened.
Yeah, because he does. There's 2 or 3 different versions based on who's asking, right? I think at one point he says, oh, it's from bleach from cleaning. Yep. There's another one where he says he got in like a fiery car accident or something when he's trying to appeal to the guy who we haven't talked about him yet. His main buddy in the movie. Such a great character who has like not a lot of screen time, but is so memorable in all of it. And it's funny because he kind of has this like very like hot rod, loves money, women, and drugs, like just very kind of like, for lack of a better term, he's kind of a fuckboy, right?
A little bit, yeah, for sure.
And then, you know, you think he's a car guy. He's always talking about how he likes to drive fast or whatever.
It's such a great scene.
And then you finally get the reveal of his vehicle, and he's like, I call her Nikki, you know, like Minaj. She's got a big bumper and great headlights, and it's a rickshaw that he has like nitro and a like insane acceleration on.
It was such a funny scene, but that character is really a representation of like how Dev Patel's character, Monkey Man, can sway the public, right? This is about people having power, and this character, his friend here, started as that guy, right? Totally bought into the money, power, all that stuff. And then by the end, he's cheering for him. Like he's, you know, full on behind him and all of it, power to the people and all that good stuff. And it was a nice way of showing the impact that character has, right?
Absolutely.
On others. But yeah, so what really happened to his hands, though, is he was trying to save his mother when she was murdered. They choked her and then set her on fire, and he was trying to save her, and he burned his hands trying to save her.
Giving her CPR while she's on fire, just as an absolute act of like selfless desperation. And it broke me, man. Honestly, that was such a hard scene to watch. Honestly,
yeah,
really devastating for sure.
I'm glad though. Are you glad we didn't get to see that until like the end of the second act, basically, or close to it?
Yeah, because I think we kind of learned. It's like the angrier he got and the closer he got being able to enact his goals, we understood with that, we got the progression of how awful what happened to her was.
And
I think there was a really good build up there of, because the mom kind of is like a guiding force for him throughout the movie through his memory.
Yep.
And so we're already attached to her. At least I felt like I was by the time we see her die, which I think was a really smart choice because you make this woman a character rather than just a lot of lesser action movies. And there are dozens out there who have done this, kill off the character before we're attached to them. And you're just supposed to understand as a person, have empathy, like losing your mom sucks. Right. But I think they gave us enough time with this one that we understand why losing her specifically is devastating to this character.
Also, the fact that like performance of the whole Monkey Man drama was happening, like when the police showed up, right? Like when all this happened. So, like that story, that lore, has stuck with him like through his life. Those two things, those two events, and so we see this rage get unleashed, but in a much more trained way. Like when he first tries the attack, we go through this long sequence where he's trying to get away, right? And he's trying to escape the police. Kind of successful a couple times. But then, he gets Call of Duty at the end. The sniper gets him.
Out of the helicopter. And it was a very Call of Duty moment, too, because the guy goes like, target in sight or target acquired or whatever he says.
So after he gets Call of Duty sniped, kid wakes up in this like community, which is the Hijra, the like third gender in India. And Dev Patel, if you listened to any of the interviews or read any of them, made it, like it was very important to him that these people were included in this film and in a way where they are empowered. And I'll just read the actual quote and then I'll get thoughts from you on this. So, quote, "For me, this is an anthem for the underdogs, the voiceless, and the marginalized. Together they wage this war for the good and the just. And for me, I really wanted to include the Hijra community, the third gender in India," end quote. So, obviously something that he put a lot of thought into and was very important. How did you feel like that part of the movie, flowed for you, went for you? Did it work?
Well, so as a non-binary person, I obviously always love to see that representation, right? And I liked that those characters all kind of like their gender doesn't define them. It's almost like they exist outside of the male-female binary, right? Where it's not even really an aspect that they focus on too much. Like it's kind of subtle, you can miss it. I think if you're not paying super close attention or you don't have that familiarity with that culture, which I didn't.
Yeah.
Right. So and I thought that like they were honestly some of my favorite characters in the movie, period. Just as far as what they meant symbolically, but also just they get some really great scenes in the movie. And I love when they kind of come in to save the day, because you have like the very John Wick, very Kill Bill moment where the elevator full of guys, like the bad guys, just are screaming and running after Kid. And you're like, how the hell does he get out of this? And then that's when the Hijra show up and they just go to town and they get like a really booming, bassy, heavy metal soundtrack, which is like the only time that kind of music I think is used in the film at all. It's usually either their OST or like licensed hip hop songs. So,
yeah, I mean, I loved this sequence. I mean, it was also like, for lack of a better term, the training montage too, right? But I feel like it was more than that.
For sure.
It was Kid learning to tap into the pain that he has suffered throughout his life in a different way, right? Instead of seeking the pain, using it to fight for those who need someone to fight for them. And so I feel like this worked really well. And also learning like there has to be a purpose to like how you fight. And, where the character Alpha is like playing the instrument. I'm not sure exactly what it's called, so I apologize. But to kind of understand the rhythm of fighting and the purpose of
You're
how
about like
you fight.
the percussion instrument, like the drums.
Yep.
Yeah, and I because I loved the way they introduced that, because it was very much just a way to show us the culture and show these people happy and introduce us to them. Because there's the she's doing the it's almost like a play where she's doing like a spoken word, kind of talking to people, doing like a story where it's supposed to be a husband and wife fighting, and the one drum is the wife, the other drum is the husband, and there's the back and forth of each side, and then they're in synchronicity, and then that comes back to be representing the left hand and the right hand, and by playing the instrument, they give Kid that pattern where he learns to be deliberate with his punches, which is like it's so cool. Because the thing is, I thought that like Kid was going to be a badass like right from from this movie with the way it's marketed in the trailers, right? Because you see him in the ring before any of the action goes down, but he's in the ring as like a punishment to himself, right? Like he's doing it as like a really terrible dead end job, trying to make some money off of essentially rigging these fights by purposely losing them in the second or third round. But there's clearly some skill there. We see that he's really resilient and can take pain and can bounce back. But it's here in that temple where he learns how to use that for good and how it can be a tool.
Yeah. which I think is the defining trait of his character up until that point, right? Being able to take pain and keep bouncing back. But I love that, like, duality is a theme with that entire part of the movie. When Kid first wakes up hurt, right, you see the representation of gods on the wall, right, and it's a duality, right, between Shiva and I forget the other one, but that ended up to be a very strong theme throughout that entire segment of the movie with the Hijra.
Absolutely.
And I just thought it was, like everything else in this film, just really well done and done in a way that is respectful, but also like meaningful to the story.
For sure.
And, like you never want somebody to be in the movie just to be in the movie. Like, these people are there because they have something to fight for, and they have very real stakes and a very real thing to offer this character. So I thought it was great. I mean, I think it helps lead the character into where he is once you get, to that third act.
Absolutely. And, they talked a bit about, like, we talked earlier about how the news segments kind of come in and give us, like, the political subtext, or not even subtext, the political context, I guess, of this world, right? And there's the moments where they literally say that, like, trans women are being randomly attacked on the street, and that's a very real thing that happens, especially in areas that have, very ultra-nationalist, ultra-conservative views. And I think putting those characters in there was a great way to introduce us to a culture for most viewers, right? Or for many viewers, I should say, not because I don't know the demos who's going to see the movie, but for a lot of folks in America, you're not familiar with that aspect of that Indian culture, but you do know about people in your life, and you see headlines of people who are on the LGBT spectrum, right? And I think it was an interesting way, like how they do a lot in the movie, to show you things that are familiar to you in a distant place, to kind of take your perspective out of it and make you reevaluate it, and then bring it back home and realize how those issues affect people where you are in the States.
It's the beauty of literature and storytelling, really, and what you just said is why people who like read a lot of fiction or watch a lot of movies that aren't like blow up explodey movies, tend to have much higher levels of empathy. Like, that's a proven thing. Yeah. So it's because of that very thing, you're able to look at some of the problems in our society, some of the things that are happening from a different point of view, because you're able to step back and look at it without the bias and, whatever you have invested in already, with these other characters in this other place at this other time.
Yes.
And then say, oh, wait a second, now you're going to draw some parallels and be like, oh, that happens here. Why don't I feel the same way about it here? Right. And it just kind of goes from there. So
for sure.
No, it's a great one. Oof. Visually, the third act is some of the best stuff I've seen in a long time. What stood out to you? I mean, the whole film really visually, because like the streets of Mumbai, between like the wealthier like downtown parts versus the like more like lower, like the slum areas,
the slums,
whatnot. Yeah. Like, it's
the literal
they're
slums.
Both just so they're so like well shot and well done. But then you get to that third act, the fight scenes, which also looked for a second like Kill Bill Part 1, like when the whole like the Crazy 88 come out, and all of that.
It's funny because I showed my dad just the trailer for this movie just to try and convince him to go with me for my second viewing. He's like, that reminds me of that Kill Bill scene.
Yeah, because it did.
Yeah, and it's I feel like all of that is deliberate homage. Rather, it never feels derivative to me.
No,
and they know what they're doing, because that's the only scene in the movie that has like very bassy heavy metal playing.
The music choices too during the fights were just
music choices in the whole movie, because I feel like the original score is great. I immediately, as soon as I got out of the theater, looked up to see if it's on streaming services yet, and it's not, unfortunately, because I'm like, I gotta immerse myself. But even just like the licensed music picks, like the Jid song at the beginning when they steal the queen's purse so that he can give it back to her.
Such a cool sequence.
Yeah, it is. Because you kind of see all the parts at play too, and how there's this ecosystem where it's like, because all of these people are doing a part of this task, where there's the guy who steals it from her, and then there's the kid who delivers it to Kid. So you kind of get a feel of that these people on the ground level, they are also organized, and they have a legitimate chance of fighting back if they just had if they had a belief and had a cause that it was possible, you know,
and something to rally behind, I think. And
absolutely.
So that, like, that scene when they're having the celebration for essentially, you know, they're like, well, we think we're on the brink of winning the election, but we know they're going to win the election, right? He shows up coming out of through the doors, and it's just like
so red in that elevator.
Yes. Well, and then at the end too, like when he goes up to meet the like religious dude, like that red was just amazing.
There's a lot of great stuff happening with lighting in this movie because so much of it takes place at night. The majority of it, honestly, and in interiors. And I think the lighting is what really helps make these parts of the world feel so different. Because it's crazy to me that you think like the very rich parts of this movie, like where the very wealthy people live in these tall buildings and in this high-end restaurant, are in the same city on the same streets as the ground level. It's just the higher you go into these buildings, it's the more luxury and the more wealth people have, and it's absolutely incredible. It's told with color. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is, and the fight scenes as well are that way, right? It's so we start out, and you know, when I watch it again, I'm gonna see if there's any green like towards the beginning of that final fight sequence. Because in the middle we get yellow, and then at the end we get red. So I wanted to see if there's any sort of like
green in the beginning, if we kind of progress like a traffic light,
like a traffic light, sure. But no, I mean the yellow when they're at the bar area fighting, and literally he has to go level by level by level in these fights. Like so he gets into the like front level, fights off a bunch of things, and he goes up to like the club level, like which is an actual club, and such a cool visual there with the mirrors like hanging from the ceiling that spin.
I'm always so partial to a good club fight scene in movies, especially if they have good score to it, and I feel like this did because they had that weird EDM remix of Roxanne playing when you see the police chief perving out on that one woman, and it's it made my skin crawl, honestly. It's gross.
You know what the best thing about the club fight scene at the end was? In contrast to John Wick, right, where there was also a really good one. This one, the club was empty. Like it was eerily empty and quiet outside of just the music that's going on the score. But
it's the two people fighting and the one guy cowering in the corner.
Who's going to be the president or leader or whatever, right? That's the guy cowering. Which I think.
I didn't even catch that.
Yeah, it is.
Wow. Wow. That's really cool.
So yeah, then he takes up the elevator to the final level, the final boss, which is this religious leader who was kind of behind dictating and steering everything. And there, like that elevator is just red all around him, and it's like, you know, it's such an amazing visual. And then when he gets up to that floor, the mural in the background, also is just awesome. But I thought
it's of this story he's been told as a kid. It's very, he's seeing all of the actions that are unfolding in his life through myth, and it's such an incredible shot when you see the kind of the outside of them, where you see them having their confrontation, and then you see the giant mural behind them and all the Diwali fireworks going off. Like,
it's so cool. Yeah,
it's so good. This movie looks so much more expensive to make than it was. I think they played with lighting and setting so well to make this movie look
Do you know what
so
the budget
polished.
was?
10 million-ish?
Are you serious?
I think so. Let me look it up. But yeah, it was not a lot.
While you're looking, I'll just make one other point. So when they're in the third act, the whole big fight starts. They call out during the speeches, like you've got all these portraits of these Maharajas on the walls around you, right? And while the fights are unfolding, the blood splatter hits all of these portraits. And it's just such a interesting visual because it speaks about the blood that's on all these people's like hands, right?
Yeah. And how they're corrupting the culture of their country.
Yep.
Right. And I think it has this movie has a lot more to say than I thought it would, politically and ideologically. And it's really about how these fundamentalist extremist groups who think that, like, ultra-conservative, ultra-nationalist groups who think they're saving their country are really destroying it and regressing it and taking the worst things about it and making that be put at the forefront. And just the hate that's rampant
and also the ones who claim to be the most populist are the ones who care about the people like the least, right? Like they will take advantage of anybody. Like
we have the new Messiah who is very wealthy and is literally at the very top of the city hanging out in the Queen's penthouse.
And when he's going into that building, by the way, like he gets out of the car and he's smiling, waving at everybody, and then the moment he gets past that crowd, his face just turns. He's like, finally, I'm done with this crap now.
Right?
It's really good storytelling through those little things. This is probably like the smartest, deepest action movie I've seen in some time. Especially like an original script, not based off of a book or something. But
for sure.
So is it actually 10 million? Is that what?
I looked up. It's $10 million. Which, because to me, this movie looks better than a lot of like $50 to $100 million action movies.
I agree.
And I think that's just because in filmmaking, it like people are only seeing what's in the frame, right? It doesn't really matter what's outside of it. And every frame in this movie is so handcrafted that you're looking at exactly what you're supposed to see. And everything that you're seeing is deliberate. It's a choice. The lighting, the colors, the sets. I loved, like, there's just a lot of, like, I feel like you don't get a lot of movies these days that really understand how valuable of a tool just the visual language of film is. And editing. Like, there's my favorite example of it is there's the shot where they're in the bathroom and there's the fish tank and shit's about to start going down. And everybody looks over to see what's going on. And then they cut to the fish also, like, flipping its head to look. And it got a laugh in my theater. But it's moments like that I think make this movie special. Honestly.
There's
just a little...
humor's done really intelligently here, I think.
For sure. And I think you need it because of how serious and heavy this movie is. It would just feel
and
like...
bloody. I mean, this movie's very violent. So... yeah, I don't know. Should we get around to giving this thing a score?
I think we should, but before we do, you're talking about how this movie's very violent. I want to know there's all sorts of nasty set pieces and kills that happen in this movie. What do you think is the one that's going to stick with you the longest?
I think that bathroom scene, that fight.
Yeah.
It's just so, like, I don't know, like visceral, just all of it. Like, it's just raw, like the end was so cool. Like, that final action sequence was so cool. Yeah. And it was really bloody, but it was like he was so well trained at that point. He was the best fighter in the room.
For sure. But I almost feel like
go ahead.
Horror. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying in the bathroom scene that wasn't the case. And he was literally fighting for his life against someone that he wanted to kill more than anything in the world. But he wasn't ready.
And right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just feel like so, like, if you're a horror fan, honestly, I think it's worth checking out this movie because there are so many creative kills that happen in this movie that I would have never even thought of. And once I did, I just, like, winced, and it was so nasty. The two that come to mind are when he's in the kitchen fight towards the end, and he punches the guy and throws him down onto the counter, and they very deliberately did not they cut this in the trailer so there's no fire there, but in the movie the burner is on. He smashes a glass of expensive alcohol over the guy's head, and alcohol is very flammable. And then the other one was when he's in the elevator with the two guards and he's fighting the one off. He gets the knife kind of barely lodged in his throat, and he has that one freaked me out. That one, like, people were yelling in the theater. They go, oh shit, like, all of those. Because the knife's barely sticking out of his throat. Like, he's just got the point in there, but it's in there. But not enough to incapacitate this dude. So he bites the handle of the knife and, like, uses the force of his mouth to plunge it deeper into the guy's throat until he's pinned to the wall by the knife in his throat. And it's just, like, it's so creative. It's so shocking. But it's so believable. Like, that's what I love about the fighting in this movie, is it really just, it feels desperate. Like, I never was sitting there thinking, like, oh, this is a choreographed fight. It's like, this is a man fighting for his life with everything he can possibly use in his environment. And it's brilliant.
I agree. The if you go back to like the Bond films, the Daniel Craig Casino Royale, like the very, very opening of that movie in black and white, that scene in the bathroom, it's very similar to the scene in this bathroom in a lot of ways, like the desperation, all that, the urgency behind it. I love everything about this. One other question before I guess we give this a score. Do you want a sequel to this?
I was going to ask you that. I was thinking that too, because the thing is, I feel like there is room.
I do too.
Both in the sense that there is, I just like this character in this world a lot, and I would love to go back in. But there's one clear big bad who's still out there, because we got rid of the crooked police chief, we got rid of the faith leader, almost, right? But all of that was to prop up and lift up the president, who's definitely going to win this election. So we have a bill to kill, for lack of a better term. So I could see it happening. I definitely want more of this kind of film from Dev Patel.
Me too. Whether
that is a sequel to this or just he tries it with some other character or working with some other actors, I'm interested regardless. I'm seated.
What I would love to see is, you know how like Jordan Peele's changed that genre with how he's made different films, but they're not all tied together. And I think Dev Patel could do that with this genre.
For sure.
It's such a different take on action, and it's not the formula you're used to. It's just brilliant. You should absolutely go see it, and I guess we'll give it a score that indicates that. We give it a 9. Like this movie's amazing. It's gotten pretty across the board in terms of scores, but more good than bad. So
yes, for sure,
definitely more good than bad. Like I've seen some that are on the lower end, definitely what I would call low for this movie, like 5 or 5.5, 6, that are like, oh, the characters don't get you invested enough to care about the action. I don't know what movie they're watching, quite frankly.
Yeah,
I didn't feel that way.
No,
I felt like this is not only did I really enjoy myself, like I learned stuff watching this. Like I learned about that culture more, and like why this story was so important and all of that. Like that's cool.
For sure.
But anyway, that's a 9. Go see it. Definitely go.
Absolutely. For sure.
All right, let's get the hell out of here. So
sounds like a plan. Even though we could talk here for another, I could double this. There's so much to dissect in this movie, and I'm sure we'll do more content on it on the site, especially. So head there.
Maybe we'll do like a best kills in Monkey Man video or something. We'll just go ultra like violent, bloody with it all.
YouTube, I don't know if YouTube would like that.
Yeah, maybe not. So, all right. We'll be back next week to do another one of these with Civil War. But in the meantime, look for other videos. We'll have like a recap of Walking Dead, The Ones Who Live, coming up. We'll have other content on entertainment, video games, etc. So just subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. We'd really appreciate that. And leave comments. If you've seen Monkey Man, let us know what you thought of the movie. We loved it, as if you can tell. But let us know what you thought. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Take care, y'all. GG's.